do want you to open your folders and pull out your assessment if we haven't done that yet. How many people had a chance to look through theirs? Okay. We're going to spend a little bit of time with that, but so the emotional quotient assessment is our way to assess your individual emotional intelligence. And I would tell you, just doing this assessment sets you apart from the crowd. So I think Michael mentioned like the idea of taking the time and being really intentional about spending time thinking about leadership. And this is one way to do that, is to kind of take an assessment, to reflect on it a little bit, which is what we're going to do after tonight, and then to come up with kind of a personal action plan for like, these are things that I individually can do to help improve my emotional intelligence. Not all people have access to tools like that, and so that's one thing we want to point out is you can't just like go online and do this whole huge assessment. And so it's part of why we focus on that in this session is bringing you this particular tool. And then a lot of people don't take the time to really sit and think through it and spend time reflecting on it and then do something about it. So emotional intelligence, regardless of the score that you see here tonight, what you want to remember is you can always get better, right? So there's no judgment in this room. You're going to communicate about some of the information that's in your personal assessment with the people that are sitting next to you. No judgment, right? So it's just about learning who you are and how you can get better. And the goal is to expand your pie. So at the very end of your assessment, you see kind of this like pie picture here. You're not going to be perfect. Like no one's going to be 100% in any particular area. But your goal is to kind of work to get above the mean, and so we'll talk about what that means. So tonight what we're going to do is kind of review that personal score, and then we're also going to think about how it to disrupt our own negative emotions and kind of retrain ourselves to respond instead of react when we're in situations that are potentially emotionally charged. All right, so there's 5 components to the assessment. Let's go ahead and open up. We're going to go to page 1 here. It's just kind of a quick overview and introduction, so we've covered a lot of this already. Like we said, the importance of this is just really that your highest performers versus average performers have a higher EQ, right? So that's why we're focusing on that. I think the other thing to keep in mind here, so we're thinking about this in the context of your teams. Eventually, someday in life, this is going to impact the, kind of the context of your jobs and whatever you're doing in your life after being an athlete. But it also just affects kind of your personal day-to-day wellness, right? So if you have the ability to manage your own emotions, you're going to be physically healthier, you're going to be mentally healthier. And so those are things that we want to remember, like all of this can kind of impact your life in every aspect. So we see the introduction, we see the breakdown between the 2 different parts and the 5 total components of the EQ assessment, right? So the first part is self, and we know that we're understanding ourselves before we try to understand others, right? So as we think about this personal action plan at the end, we're going to focus on how to improve the self scores first and then move to the other scores. But we're going to look at motivation first, and then self-awareness and self-regulation, and then as we move into other, social awareness and social regulation. Then I want you to skip to pages 3 and 4, so move ahead there in your assessment. You should have 5 paragraphs between those 2 pages. Each one of those paragraphs relates to these 5 components, okay? And so the first one is self-awareness, the second one is self-regulation, the third one is motivation, the fourth one is social awareness, and the 5th one is social regulation. And so we're going to kind of work through this tonight. You're going to take a couple minutes for each paragraph. We're going to read it. We're going to talk about it quick, kind of just in small groups, and then we'll go from there. As you move ahead then, pages 5 and 6 are your scores. So we'll talk about what your scores mean. Let's go ahead and flip to page 5, just so you can see. You've got your individual score report, right, based on a score of 100. The little bar there, so you kind of see underneath each of the 5 components, there's a bar with a number. That's the mean, or the average of the population taking these assessments, right? So 68% of the total population falls within that mean. And so our goal is to get to that mean if we're not there or above it, right? So we'll talk about what that means as well. And then as you move forward, there are breakdowns for each of the 5 components of emotional intelligence. And it's giving you some sense of kind of where you're at for that particular area. And then what are some things that you individually can do. Some of these might be things you're already doing. Some of these might be things that don't relate to your specific place in life right now. But I guarantee that for every one of you on all of those pages, one of those things is going to be able to help you improve that particular score. And so part of your goal with this is to look through this and reflect on this after tonight. We're not going to do this part tonight, but to pull out at least one of those things from those recommendations and think of it as a way to work on it. And then the last, very last page is your emotional quotient wheel, right? And so we're gonna start with motivation tonight because motivation kind of surrounds everything, right? So it impacts all of our individual and kind of self-emotion, then it impacts everything that we're doing with other people. All right, so let's look first at paragraph 3 on page 3. And I want you to take just 1 minute to read through paragraph 3 on page 3. Okay, so when we think about motivation, we've heard about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation, right? So that's not part of this EQ, but the idea of extrinsic is I'm motivated by things outside of myself, right? So money, power, accolades, all-American awards, whatever it is. Intrinsic motivation is that thing like it makes me feel good, or I love winning, or whatever that is, right? So that intrinsic part is something that's inside me. So when we think about motivation in this respect, it's not necessarily about that power, but it's more about what you see at the end there, the internal driver, propensity to pursue goals with energy and persistence. It's what makes me get up every day and go to practice and try really hard, right? So that's the idea of the motivation here. So in this paragraph that you read about yourself, I want you to think about right now, do you agree with everything that's in there? If there's anything that you don't agree with right now, I want you to underline it. And this is an activity we're going to do for each one. If there's any part of that, whether it's one word or a whole sentence or the whole thing, I want you to underline anything that you're like, I don't know if that's me or not. And then you're all sitting by people who know you. So I want you to ask the person next to you. I want you to show them the sentence and ask them what they think. And again, this is a no judgment zone. Okay, so if the person next to you is like, that is totally you, no judgment, right? You just want to make a note of like, they agree with me or they don't agree with me. Okay?
Oh, use your personality. Yeah. No, there's something's coming. We're not talking about civil war. We're talking about
And I think it's when people start coming in, you can start putting it No, I really like Okay, so right words. If you are saying these two right here are a great example, my whole paragraph's wrong. None of this is true about me. I want you to change a couple words. Okay, so if you're reading it and you're like, that is not me, change the word to what makes it you, in your opinion. Okay?
I need to wake up.
Okay, we're going to bring it back up here. For the sake of time, you all have a sense of maybe what you don't think is totally accurate about yourself, okay? So make that note there. We're going to talk about that. I'm going to bring you back to the DISC assessment from last year, okay? So it was the very first session we did last year. you did a disc assessment, you each had a level, right? So one of these letters was your letter, right? Your highest letter. Who remembers what their letter was? Okay, who still has their disc assessment? In your binder. Okay, I do want everybody to go back and look, okay? So I'm gonna remind you kind of what the motivators are for each of these letters, and that might help trigger your memory for some of what we talked about last year. So the D stands for dominance. So people who are high D really value efficiency, success, and they're very results oriented, okay? So they are like, when we think about like an animal, they're the lion, right? They're the lion in the room, like all over it, right? Tend to be the boss. High S's value steadiness, okay? So they operate at a little bit of a slower pace. 45% of our population is a high S, which totally shocks me, but that's the true statement. So these people value needing time to think, needing security in their situation, right, and stability, and they really value kind of one-on-one connections, okay? High C's are conscientiousness. These are people who like rules, they like order, they're very detail-oriented, and they really like getting things done, right? So efficiency is kind of their highest value. And then people who are high I's that stands for influential. Those are people who really value relationships, right? So they want to be liked by everyone. They want there to be a lot of like camaraderie and friendship and love in the room and all of that, okay? So are we triggering what this was me? You guys remembering kind of what it was? Okay. So as we think about that, you want to kind of relate that back to your motivation, right? So my motivation for things is I want to see results, right? So what am I doing? And how am I behaving that are going to get those results in my high D state, right? Okay, so next one is self-awareness.
Okay, so self-awareness, we're going to move pretty quickly just in the interest of time. So if you could go to, is it the first paragraph on page 3 and read that. Think of the definition of self-awareness as the ability to recognize and understand your moods, emotions, and drivers and how they affect others. Going to do a similar thing where you're underlining anything that you don't agree with and then talking to your partner about that.
Yeah, that makes sense. You know, buddy. The motivation.
Is what? Oh, this quarter. I thought
Reading stratosphere.
Okay, so make sure you make notes of those areas that perhaps you don't agree with. I can get your attention again. I love how excited you all are about this information, but if I can get you to refocus here for a quick second. Okay, so as we think about self-awareness, we're thinking about emotions, right? And our emotions impact our behavior. So it's important for us to understand where that behavior comes from. And so as we're thinking about the DISC assessment, tying it all back into the DISC assessment, it's important that we understand our weaknesses. Okay, so as we think about the weaknesses that we have, D oftentimes are impatient and they're direct. I, impulsive, act on your emotions or on your gut. Let's see, S, avoid risk, can't say no. C, oftentimes cool and aloof and critical. Okay, so it's important that we understand those weaknesses so we understand where those emotions come from. So someone like me who's a D, right? So my weaknesses are impatience and being direct. So I'm often going to feel frustrated, right? So that's where that emotion comes from. As I think about self-awareness and my emotions, and tying it back to my behavior. I'm going to be frustrated in those scenarios. And so we have a choice. We can do one of two things. We can either react or respond. So the way in which we react is tied to our personality styles. That's why it's important to think about that disc, to think about what those weaknesses are, so that we can then be aware of the emotions that may follow, so that we can then control our response. And that moves into the next category, okay? So as we think about responding, we need to take a step back, okay? And this is self-regulation. So if you could turn to that same page and look at the second paragraph on page 3 of your report and read through that. Self-regulation is the ability to control or redirect our disruptive impulses, moods, and the propensity to suspend judgment and think before acting. So read through that, underline what you don't agree with, make note, talk with your partner.
My favorite's when
Okay, if we can bring it back to the group. I get your attention. Self-regulation. Why is it important? When do we have to enact self-regulation? Can I get your attention, please? We're getting close, and you're doing such a great job. Okay? Self-regulation. That comes into play when someone acts in a way that you aren't interested or not used to the way in which they're reacting. Let me say that again. When you, as all of us who have our own personality styles, right? So going back to that disc, we all prefer people respond in a certain way. When we have to enact self-regulation, we're doing so because they're responding in a way that doesn't really align with our personality style, right? So if we go back to that DISC assessment, if we think about D's, I would prefer people be direct. I prefer they be open to feedback and really wanting results. If I were an I would prefer they be friendly. They'd recognize accomplishments. If I was an S, I'd prefer people be relaxed and agreeable and cooperative. If it was a C, minimize socializing. Give accurate details and direction. So, as we think about that, that's how many, do we have other D's in the room? Right? So when people don't respond in the way in which we want them to, we have to step back. We have to pause. We have to think about the negative responses that we're going to have. We have to self-regulate so that we can accomplish what we want to accomplish. Because if we lash out or if we react in a way that doesn't allow for productivity, we are not accomplishing our goals. So self-regulation. First, self-awareness, being aware, right? And then of our emotions, and then self-regulation, controlling them so that we don't have those negative responses and reactions.
Okay, and so as we get the ability to kind of rewire ourselves, it kind of brings us back to this idea of motivation, right? So change occurs, this ability for us to stop and change what we're doing and rewire ourselves happens because of our motivation, right? That motivation is higher than what that kind of static personality trait is about me. So my high D, if I'm motivated to be success-oriented, and that means certain numbers out of my office or whatever it is, I can't be so focused on only my way to get those results because not everybody operates like me, right? So if I only do things my way, I'm not going to get the results I need out of our office, right? So the change occurs because that motivation for me is more important than keeping things at my same personality style, right? And so that brings us to social awareness. So social awareness is the ability to understand the emotional makeup of other people and how your words and actions affect other people, right? So we're moving from, I know about myself, now I'm understanding other people. And I think you can, the idea you take out of this particular component is empathy. And we're gonna talk about what that means, but read paragraph 1 on page 4 of your report for social awareness. We're gonna take just 1 minute to read this, underline what you don't agree with. You can talk quickly with your partner.
I think that's the best thing. I'm not being stupid. You know why? Because this is telling me, okay, you feel like these things, or 2 or 3 or 4, whatever you do. But this is obviously not how you yourself or want to. It's not just this well,
Okay, so you should have some notes if you agree or don't agree. As we think about empathy, it's the ability to understand, listen up here, we're almost done. Empathy is the ability to learn about and understand the emotions of another person and share in those emotions, right? So let's say I'm not an emotional person, I am, but if I wasn't, right, and my best friend is super emotional on my team, right? I need to understand their emotion and understand where that emotion is coming from, right? I don't have to be that emotional person to have empathy. I need to understand where it's coming from and understand why they have it, okay? So empathy is absolutely key as a skill for any leader, right? Because you need to understand where your teammates are coming from to build that trust that our coaches were talking about. If you don't have empathy, you cannot build trust with your teammates, okay? So what are 3 steps to empathy? It's learning about the other people on your team, right? So again, your team is going to be made up of D's and I's and S's and C's, and everybody's different. And all your D's on your team, they're not all the same. They're different kind of D a little bit. You may have the same motivations and prefer some of the same things, but you're different, right? So you need to learn about everyone on your team. The next step there is thinking about why would they feel the way they feel, right? So if somebody's having, in your opinion, what is some ridiculous emotional reaction to something, you need to take a step back, right? This is the rewiring of, I'm not going to get annoyed with them. I'm not going to get angry at them. I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to see what they say about what they're feeling. I'm going to try to understand why they're feeling the way they're feeling, right? And then that third part is putting yourself in their place. If that was me, right, or if someone made me feel that emotion, you know, how would I be responding, right? So this social awareness is understanding those feelings of other people, okay? That takes us to our last component, which is social regulation. And this is the ability to influence the emotional clarity of others through a proficiency in managing relationships and building networks. It is all about relationship management. Emotional intelligence is relationship management, okay? And so as we think about social regulation and we think about leadership, if you are a leader, you have the ability to influence your team, right? And that's not just, I'm gonna get them to run faster in sprints. It's I'm going to get them to think about things differently. I'm going to get them to work towards this goal in a different way, mentally, emotionally, physically, whatever it is. So read paragraph 2 on page 4 of your report, same thing, agree, disagree, talk really quickly with your partner. Okay, so everyone should have some notes on what they agree or disagree with. Okay, as we think about social regulation, that's the end game, right? It's the end game of our emotional intelligence practice is figuring out how to manage our relationships and build better relationships. And there's a lot of skill that goes along with that. So part of what we're going to focus on in the next 2 sessions, so we have 3 total group sessions this year. We'll have one in the winter quarter, one in the spring quarter. You're also going to have either an individual or small group session that's going to follow up on each of these things, okay? And so we'll reach back out to you about that. But we're going to talk about navigating difficult conversations. We're going to talk about how to manage conflict within teams and how to be effective communicators. Those are all really key skills where you're going to take something tangible out of that workshop that you can apply back to your team. Okay, and so as we think of this summary, we want you to take some time to think about your scores and your feedback. We want you to look at the notes that you wrote. We want you to look at those suggestion pages for each of the 5 components. What are things that we can do? And I want you to identify 1 or 2 things that make sense for you based on your score. As you think about improvement, you obviously want to work on your self-scores first. As young leaders and developing leaders, it's pretty common that your self-scores are going to be a little bit higher than your other scores. And so we're going to start with self first, talk about if there's things we can do to improve that, and then create kind of a personal action plan. We're going to talk about how to improve those other scores as well. So I need you to watch for a follow-up email from me. There's going to be like a quick little worksheet. It'll take you just a couple minutes to fill out. And then probably at the start of the winter quarter, we're going to have those individual or small group sessions. Okay, thanks for your attention tonight. Great work.